Okay, so good afternoon as we are now. Thank you for accepting my talk today. So what I wanted to do was just to give a brief update as a follow-up to previous presentations that have been done in terms of Mining Remediation Authority permissions to access coal mines for mine water heat schemes and projects. I shall move quite quickly through the first few slides because that information is available in other presentations. So, as you've already heard, a Mine Remediation Authority owns and manages the majority of coal mines and unworked coal across Great Britain. We can provide access to that property to help to facilitate mine water heat schemes and projects. We're not the regulator. That is the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, SEPA. And as has also been discussed, we don't own the heat that's within those mines. What we are doing is literally providing you access to occupy that property. In terms of mine water heat opportunities, we've looked at open loop and closed loop options. And when we're looking at open loop, we're generally thinking about a doublet system where there'll be some form of abstraction and some form of discharge of the water. And when we're looking at closed loop, we're generally looking at loops that might be grouted into a borehole or sort of submerged into workings or potentially within a mine shaft. We also have surface water schemes, which are those we call waste heat schemes, which are associated with mine water treatment schemes. And you had a presentation yesterday from Stuart to talk a little bit more about that. So in terms of the types of permissions, we've got access agreements, which is agreement that we would enter into with an operator or a research institution, for example, to operate a scheme to carry out that research. And that agreement has terms and conditions within that are agreed and are looking at the sort of the safe operation of that scheme against the risks that we manage. Permits are issued prior to the access agreement for the exploratory work that would be carried out. So in terms of applying for permissions, we look for technical information, and each stage of the technical information is informed by work that was done at the previous stage. So within an access agreement where you're looking at those controls, which may relate to water levels, for example, there'll have been some monitoring data and some sampling data done at previous stages to establish baselines by which we can monitor. The permissions that we provide are sort of a combination of those that work with the regulator. So we've got there a chart that has been updated recently and will be sort of updated shortly on the website as well, where we're looking at how we interact with permissions that are provided by the Environment Agency and how we look at how we work with Natural Resources Wales, and the process for the work with Natural Resources Wales will be published shortly as well. And then we're also looking at putting together an outline of how we give permissions within Scotland. So in terms of looking at our permissions for schemes and projects, so what I wanted to do was just give a little bit more information about starting at the end of the process rather than at the start of the process. So if we're looking at schemes that are operational, at that point we'll have what is called the project term access agreement, and that can be for a longer period of time. It can be up to 20 years, and that provides that operation. It is supported by an agreed monitoring strategy, which helps to manage and mitigate the risks that may have been identified for that specific scheme. At the initial stage of the access agreement, which is where we could have testing for a scheme or also for research, that is where we'll give permission for things such as a step and constant rate test, which will include the discharge back into the property, short-term commissioning tests, and some baseline monitoring. Generally speaking, they would be for a 12-month period to help to facilitate that time period between the drilling and between the real baseline information and wanting to get to the point where you can be operational. In recognition that research projects are generally going to take out a little bit longer, and that a research project in terms of the Mine Remediation Authority permissions wouldn't progress towards a project term operational access agreement, we can look at initial term for up to 18 months. If a research project wants to progress towards becoming an operational scheme, that would then we'd be looking at a new application form that was assessed against the scheme being operational. Before that, we'll do permits for exploratory work, which includes things such as the borehole drilling, potentially shaft surveys if you're looking at a shaft. And initially that will be for a 12-month period. Importantly, while we're saying that this is providing access to the property, this isn't manned access. That isn't provided under this type of permission. So all applications are determined on a case-by-case basis. They are determined by the conditions in the area. Within her presentation yesterday, in the keynote speech, Sarah mentioned about the importance of evidence. And that's actually what we're looking for in the evidence that we provide in terms of those applications. So when we're looking at the risks that we manage, we're predominantly looking at and considering mine gas and ground stability. And within mine gas, we also not just ask for data and monitor in relation to that gas. We're also looking at the hydrogeology here, because one of the key ways we manage the risk of gas is to ensure the workings remain flooded. So what would we be looking for in terms of mine gas? What's really critical is at the operational stage, as a minimum, we'd be looking for carbon dioxide and methane to be monitored. We'd always be looking for standard reporting as percentage volume, and concentrations should be recorded from within the borehole. As a baseline, we're saying about a minimum of 1 metre below the top of the borehole, and also in the headspace above the water. Other gases may be required to be monitored. That could be on a site-by-site basis, and we'd be looking then at trigger levels for system shutdown and baseline restarts. Those trigger levels will be set around safe limits for the concentrations of those gases, and that's where your baseline data to understand what the baseline conditions in your specific area are important in terms of that trigger level. And what this then does is it gives that comfort and that reassurance that the schemes are being managed and that safety is being considered. So prior to that, at the testing stage, there's the review of the potential risk. We're looking at again monitoring during that initial pumping test period. And at the permit stage, there will always be the requirement for monitoring during drilling, which is a standard condition of permits. But also you've got that potential and that opportunity to gather some baseline data before the scheme becomes operational, before you've done any testing and there's been sort of the movement of the water. So looking at mine water, what we're looking here is an understanding in the applications of the mine system, and that we are able to manage those risks there. So the hydrological impact assessment will set this out. That's where the demonstration will be about the connections between the workings, the evidence that the workings are flooded, for example, and a hydrogeological conceptual model would be part of that. We've established a baseline table as part of a standard table as part of the application process for borehole details, which has been discussed in previous presentations. But we're now in a position where we've also established a template table for water quality and the monitoring of water quality, which is that I appreciate you can't see the details, but there's just to set out that we've got a way that can be standardised in terms of providing that information, which gives it a little bit clearer for applicants as to what we require in order to review this. So in terms of being operational, we'd be looking for demonstration that the water level is being monitored on an ongoing basis. It's a real good precursor to any potential risks for mine gas. That could be agreed as to how that is done on a long term, and that could be manual monitoring, it could be automatic login, it could be a combination of the two things. And that would then include a trigger level for shutdown, and again a baseline for restart, which is where your initial monitoring is so important. And it's informed by pumping test outcomes. This and the mine gas, etc., it's supported by a monitoring strategy that would sit outside of the permissions, but that sets out as an agreed thing between ourselves and the applicant how we would want to see monitoring in terms of standing reporting and exception reporting. So again, at the testing stage, that's when further information is done, is how did the system respond when you did your pumping test? And again, at the permit stage, it's that establishment of baseline data. So one of the things with the permit stage that's really critical is it can enable desktop information to be reviewed following the drilling. Did you find what you expected during drilling? The other key risk for which we manage is that of ground stability, the risk of subsidence. So whereas the water levels and the mine gas will be monitored throughout the project, ground stability, the key assessment for ground stability is generally done at the permit stage. So what are those ground conditions? And the drilling of the boreholes gives critical information to establish that information for us. So we'd be looking at a review of the permit application form. Do you have sufficient competent cover? How strong are the superficials? What did you find? Have you got evidence from within those boreholes that we can do that? During the operation, we would also be looking for visual observations, but establishing that key data is critical at this point. So in terms of next steps, we've done quite a lot of work, a lot of progress in terms of developing an application process. We've looked at providing greater clarity. Over the next few weeks, we'll have some further updates on the website to provide that further information. And that will include some updated documents such as notes for applicants and those standard templates for water quality and gas monitoring. And hopefully we'll also then be in a position to provide more of a standard as to what we're looking for within the technical submission to help inform and streamline the process for the application and the permissions process. Thank you very much.